What in the hell is that fancy piece of garbage? Sal's voice cut through the groaning of the cranes like a blade. He pointed a thick grease-stained finger at my work, and the entire crew at the 10th Avenue terminal turned to watch. The air, thick with the taste of rust and brine, suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. He was the foreman, a legend on the docks, and I was just the quiet ex-accountant he loved to mock. With a contemptuous flick of his knife, he sliced my knot clean off the cleat, the rope falling limp like my own pride. The laughter from the other men stung more than the salt spray on my face. They saw a rookie who didn't belong. He saw a Boy Scout playing with rope. But nobody imagined what I would do that day. If this sentence made you think of someone, just comment with, "I understand." My name is Rob. I'm 37 years old, and for the last 6 months, my world has been the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal in the Port of San Diego. I used to live in a world of spreadsheets and quarterly reports, a place where the loudest sound was the hum of a server and the air tasted like filtered, recycled oxygen. I was an accountant, a good one, but one day, the numbers just stopped adding up for me. The neat columns and balanced budgets felt like a cage I had built for myself. So I walked away. I wanted to feel the sun on my back, the strain in my muscles. I wanted to build something real, to move things that mattered. I wanted to work with my hands. Here on the docks, the air tastes like rust and brine, a constant gritty reminder that I'm a world away from that old life. But that taste, more often than not, has been the taste of failure. My boss, the shift foreman, is a man named Sal. He's 60, with hands like worn leather and a voice that sounds like it was scraped over barnacles. He's a legend on the docks, a man who seems to have been born from the very concrete and steel of the terminal. And from the first day I showed up, with my still soft hands and my quiet, observant nature, he decided I was his personal project in humiliation. To him, I wasn't a man trying to build a new life. I was a joke, the accountant, the rookie. The soft hands, who didn't belong among the hardened veterans who had spent their lives here. He saw my meticulous, careful way of working not as a strength, but as a weakness. In a world that valued speed and raw power, my precision was a liability, a sign that I was thinking too much when I should have been pulling. The worst of it happened on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of a dirty pearl. The air was heavy and damp, and the groaning of the cranes seemed to get under your skin. We were securing a generator the size of a small truck onto a flat rack container. The ropes were thick, greasy, and stiff from the morning chill. I went to work on my corner, my fingers moving with a practiced economy. I used a knot my grandfather, a Navy man, had taught me decades ago. It was a variation of a constrictor knot, an elegant, beautiful thing designed for one purpose, to tighten under strain. The more pressure you put on it, the more it bit down, the more it refused to let go. It was clean, efficient, and in my mind, unbreakable. I finished it, pulled it taut, and felt a small, private flicker of pride. That's when I heard Sal's boots echoing on the steel deck. He stopped everything. The whining of the cranes, the shouts between the crew, the clanging of metal on metal, it all seemed to fade into a dull hum as he stomped over to me. He didn't even have to say my name. I felt the eyes of the entire crew turn to me, a dozen men stopping their work to watch the show. My face grew hot. He pointed a thick, grease-stained finger at my work. "What in the hell is that fancy piece of garbage?" he barked, his voice cutting through the damp air. I tried to explain. "It's a tension knot, Sal. It holds tighter the more it's—" He cut me off before I could finish. "I don't care if it was blessed by the Pope." He spat, his voice dripping with scorn. "You're not some Boy Scout trying to earn a merit badge. You're on my dock. You tie a bowline, you hear me? A bowline. The same knot your daddy used and his daddy before him. Then he did something that broke a part of me." He pulled out his rigging knife, its blade worn and sharp, and with one swift, contemptuous slice, he cut my knot clean off the cleat. The rope fell limp to the deck. My knot, my grandfather's knot, undone in a second of casual cruelty. "Now do it right, rookie," he snarled. Before you cost us real money." The laughter started then. It wasn't loud, just a series of low chuckles and snorts from the other men, but it felt like a physical blow. It was the sound of my isolation, the confirmation that I was, and always would be, an outsider. I swallowed my pride, my throat tight, and my hands shook slightly as I tied the simple, familiar bowline he demanded, his shadow looming over me. For the rest of the day, and for weeks after, they called me Scout. Every time I heard it, it was a reminder of that limp rope on the deck, a reminder that my knowledge meant nothing here. Weeks later, a massive storm was rolling in off the Pacific. You could feel it in the air long before you saw it. The pressure dropped. The wind began to howl with a low, menacing voice, and the sky turned a bruised purple-gray. We were in a mad rush to load the last set of containers onto the Pacific Voyager before the port officially shut down. This wasn't just any shipment. It was sensitive electronics, worth millions, and it had to get out. The wind was whipping salt spray across the docks, making everything slick and treacherous. The main gantry crane was groaning under the strain, fighting the gusts as it lifted the final stack of containers. It was swaying dangerously, and everyone was on edge. Then we heard it. It wasn't a bang or a crash. It was a sound no one on a dock ever wants to hear. It was a high-pitched, metallic scream, a sound of metal being tortured past its breaking point. I saw it before anyone else seemed to process what the sound meant. A stabilizing cable on the crane's spreader bar, a thick steel rope, had gone taut as a guitar string, and then, with a sickening twang, it snapped. The entire stack of containers, over 40 tons of steel and precious cargo, lurched violently to one side. The emergency brakes on the crane engaged with a deafening screech, but the damage was done. The whole world seemed to tilt. Men shouted and scattered. Alarms started blaring across the terminal, a frantic, useless shriek against the rising storm. The load was hanging at a terrifying angle, held only by the corner lashings. Everyone else was running for cover, looking up in horror. But my eyes were fixed on the ropes. I knew what was coming next, and in the chaos, nobody was listening. Nobody saw the disaster that was about to unfold. But I did. If you've ever felt this way, just leave a, in the comments. We get it. The world dissolved into a symphony of pure mechanical terror. The metallic scream of the snapping cable was the first note, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the bone. Then came the gut-wrenching lurch of the crane, a 40-ton shudder that vibrated through the steel deck and up my legs. The stack of containers, which moments before had been rising with a kind of industrial grace, was now a pendulum of death, swinging wildly against the bruised purple sky. Alarms blared, their electronic shrieks fighting a losing battle against the howl of the wind. Men were yelling, their voices thin and panicked, scattering like ants from a boot heel. They ran from the danger, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the four corners of that teetering metal giant. My mind, the same one that used to find patterns in spreadsheets, was now racing, calculating angles and stress points. I wasn't just seeing chaos, I was seeing a cascade of failures. My eyes darted to the lashings, the thick ropes holding the life of this shipment, and potentially the lives of anyone caught underneath it, in their fibers. I saw the bowlines, Sal's knots. The right way, the way things have always been done. And I watched them die. The first one went with a sound like a rifle shot. Crack. The rope didn't just break, it exploded, fibers vaporizing under the impossible shearing force. The container stack tilted even more violently. A collective gasp was stolen by the wind. Then the second one went. Crack. Another corner of the stack dropped a few feet, sending a shockwave through the entire rig. I could hear the metal of the container itself groaning, protesting as its frame twisted. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw the third rope, not snapping, but slipping. The bowline, a knot designed to be untied, was doing just that. It was loosening its own noose, surrendering under pressure. It was a slow, agonizing failure, the tail of the rope pulling through the loop until it came free with a final, pathetic thwip. Now it was all on one line. One corner, one knot, mine. The 40-ton stack of electronics worth more money than I'd ever seen was hanging by a thread. My thread, the fancy piece of garbage. And in the middle of the screaming wind and the blaring alarms, I saw it. The knot wasn't slipping. It wasn't fraying. It was doing exactly what my grandfather said it would. The immense, terrifying weight was pulling the main line taut, and the coils of the constrictor were biting down, cinching harder and harder with every gust of wind that rocked the load. It was holding, but it was also a single point of failure. The container was still swinging, a monstrous pendulum that was putting incredible side-to-side stress on that one cleat, that one section of rope. It wouldn't hold forever. The swinging had to be stopped. That's when I moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct. While every other man on that dock was either running for cover or frozen in horror, I ran toward the problem. I saw a spare mooring line, thick and heavy, coiled near a bollard. My hands, slick with rain and trembling with adrenaline, fumbled with the end of it. The salt spray felt like needles on my face, and the wind threatened to tear the rope from my grasp. Sal's voice cut through the din. "Scout, what the hell are you doing? Get back here, you idiot." His words barely registered. They were just more noise in the storm. The man who had humiliated me was now just a scared old man shouting into the wind. My world had shrunk to the swaying containers above me, the slick deck beneath my feet, and the heavy, wet rope in my hands. I had to create a new anchor point, a guy line to stop the lateral motion. It meant running directly under the path of that swinging tonnage. My blood was roaring in my ears, a sound louder than the alarms. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of salt and ozone and something else, the metallic tang of pure fear. I timed the swing. As the stack moved away from me, I sprinted across the open space, my boots slipping on the wet steel. I reached a heavy-duty D-ring welded to the deck on the far side, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. I had one shot at this. I looped the rope through, pulling as much slack as I could. Now for the hard part. I had to get the other end secured to the container itself. I looked up, judging the distance, the arc of the swing. The wind tore at my jacket. I coiled a section of the rope, my fingers remembering movements I hadn't used in years. I waited for the apex of its swing, the brief, almost weightless pause before it came crashing back the other way, and then I threw. The rope sailed up, a dark snake against the gray sky, and for a terrifying second, I thought the wind had taken it, but it slapped against the side of the bottom container, right near the corner casting. It was close. I pulled it back, my muscles screaming in protest. My hands were raw, the rope biting into my skin. I threw again. This time it caught. The weighted end hooked perfectly into the corner fitting. I didn't wait to celebrate. I scrambled back to the bollard, yanking on the line, pulling all the slack out of it until it was taut. I wrapped it, my body straining against the pull, my feet sliding. I used a hasty anchor hitch, pulling, wrapping, locking it down. The new line groaned, stretched tight as a piano wire, and the wild, terrifying swing of the container stack began to slow. It didn't stop, but it was dampened, its deadly momentum bleeding away. It was still hanging by my one knot, but it was stable. I had bought us time. I had turned a catastrophe into a crisis we could manage. I collapsed back against the bollard, my lungs burning, my entire body shaking. The noise of the storm was still raging, but a strange, profound silence had fallen over the men on the dock. They were all staring, not at the crane, not at the container. They were staring at me. That's when everything changed. And no one ever looked at me the same way again. Would you have done the same? Seriously, just answer with yes or no, so I know you're here. The wind was still screaming, a wild, raw sound that seemed to want to peel the world down to its bones. Rain lashed down, cold and sharp. But in the small circle of men on the 10th Avenue dock, there was a silence so profound it was louder than the storm. It was a vacuum where the usual noises of work, the shouts, the grunts, the casual curses, should have been. In their place was the heavy, awkward stillness of men who have just witnessed the impossible. I pushed myself up, my back scraping against the rough metal of the bollard. My whole body was a live wire of adrenaline and exhaustion. My hands were on fire, the skin torn and weeping where the rope had bit into them. I looked at my work. The guy line I'd thrown was stretched to its breaking point, a thin black line of defiance against the storm, holding the 40-ton pendulum in a state of suspended animation. And beyond it, holding everything, was my knot. The knot Sal had sliced away in disgust. I finally looked up at the faces of the crew. They were just shapes in the gray, storm-lashed light, but I could see their expressions clearly. It was like watching a series of masks fall away. The smirks were gone. The casual contempt had vanished. In its place was raw, unvarnished shock. A few of them had their mouths slightly open, rain dripping from their chins, their eyes wide and fixed not on the hanging container, but on me. I saw Jorge, a guy who always laughed the loudest at Sal's jokes about the accountant, staring at my bleeding hands. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept looking at my hands, then back to the knot, then back to my hands, as if trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. Mike, a veteran of 30 years who had never spoken a single word to me other than "pass the wrench," slowly took off his hard hat and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, his gaze locked on the single rope holding millions of dollars of cargo. It was a gesture of disbelief, of a man seeing something that overturned a lifetime of certainty. The world he knew, a world of bowlines and brute force, had just been proven wrong. And then there was Sal. He stood apart from the others, his stocky frame braced against the wind. For a long moment he didn't move. He just stared at the scene, his face a granite slab I couldn't read. I expected him to start yelling, to find some way to blame me for this, to reassert his authority. My heart, which had just begun to slow, started hammering again. He was the foreman. He could still make my life a living hell. He could fire me on the spot for disobeying his order. He started walking. He didn't stomp. His steps were slow, deliberate, each thud of his heavy boots on the steel deck a drumbeat counting down to my fate. He didn't come toward me. He walked right past me, his shoulder almost brushing mine, and went to the cleat. He knelt down. In the middle of a raging storm, with alarms still blaring in the distance, the 60-year-old foreman knelt on the wet, greasy deck like a man praying at an altar. He leaned in close, his face inches from my knot. He stared at it, his eyes tracing the path of the rope, the way the coils dug into the main line. He saw what I saw, what my grandfather had taught me. He saw that the immense, terrifying strain wasn't the enemy of this knot. It was its source of strength. The more the container pulled, the harder the knot bit down, refusing to surrender. It was a perfect, elegant, brutal machine of tension. He reached out a thick, grease-stained finger, the same finger he had pointed at me in accusation, and gently, almost reverently touched one of the coils. He felt its impossible tightness. He was seeing proof. Not an argument, not a theory from a book, but cold, hard, undeniable proof that his way was not the only way, and that in this moment, his way had failed. He stood up slowly, his knees cracking. He turned and finally looked at me. The scorn was gone. The anger was gone. His face was pale, and the deep lines around his eyes seemed to hold a new weight. It wasn't shame, not exactly. It was something heavier. It was the look of a man whose entire world, a world built on a foundation of simple, unshakable rules, had just been cracked down the middle. His gaze dropped from my face to my hands. He saw the blood, the raw skin. He saw the price of that throw, of wrestling that rope into submission. In his world, hands told a story, and for the first time, he was reading mine correctly. They weren't soft hands anymore. They were the hands that had done what no one else had even thought to do. He turned to the rest of the crew, who were still standing there like statues. His voice, when it came, was different. The usual gravelly bark was gone, replaced by a quiet, strained authority that cut through the wind more effectively than any shout. "Nobody," he said, his voice low and firm, "touches that line." He pointed at two of the younger guys. "You two, get on the radio. Tell the port authority we have a stabilized load, but we need the auxiliary crane on the north side, now." They scrambled to obey, their movements jerky and fast. He looked at the rest of the men. "The rest of you, clear this deck, cordon it off. No one gets within 50 yards. Then he looked over his shoulder, not quite at me, but in my direction. "And someone get him a damn coffee." It was the most profound thing he could have said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was an acknowledgement. In the brutal, unsentimental language of the docks, it was a declaration. He belongs. He is one of us. He took 2 more steps toward me and stopped. The rain ran in rivers down his face. "When this is over," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the storm, "you're going to show every man on this dock how to tie that knot." He didn't wait for an answer. He just nodded once, a short, sharp dip of his chin, and turned to supervise the arriving auxiliary crane. He left me there, standing by the bollard, my hands throbbing, my body shaking, the steam from a thermos someone had silently placed in my hand, rising to meet the cold rain. The taste of rust and brine was still on my tongue, but for the first time, it didn't taste like failure. It tasted like respect, earned in silence. If you've ever proven something to someone in silence, comment, "They understood too late." The storm didn't just break that day, it washed something clean. In the hours that followed, as the auxiliary crane crept into position and a specialized team began the painstaking work of securing the 40-ton pendulum, a new world order settled over the 10th Avenue dock. I wasn't in charge, but for the first time, I wasn't invisible either. Sal orchestrated the recovery, his voice a low growl of commands, but his eyes, they kept finding me. He'd shout an order, then his gaze would flick to me for a fraction of a second, as if seeking a confirmation I didn't know how to give. The other men moved with a grim, quiet efficiency. They gave me a wide berth, not out of avoidance, but out of a strange, unspoken deference. Jorge, the one who always laughed the loudest at Sal's jokes, was the one who brought me the thermos. He didn't say a word. He just pushed it into my good hand, met my eyes for a brief, awkward moment, and walked away. It was more than an apology. It was a surrender. The next morning the sun came out sharp and brilliant, making the wet asphalt steam. The air was scrubbed clean and the sky was a deep, placid blue. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Sal called the morning muster not in the break room but out on the deck, right beside the cleat where my knot had held. The cleat was empty now, but it felt like a monument. He gathered all 15 men from our shift in a semicircle. He didn't look at them. He looked at me. "All right," he started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "Yesterday, we got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with ropes and steel. It had to do with one man knowing something the rest of us were too damn stubborn to learn." He paused, and the silence was heavy. "Rob," he said, and the name felt solid, permanent. "Show them." And so I did. My hands were stiff and bandaged, but my fingers remembered. I took a length of new rope, and in the quiet morning light, with the gulls crying overhead, I demonstrated my grandfather's knot. I showed them how the loops worked, how to form the constrictor, how to dress it so it would bite down and never let go. And these men, these hard, cynical men who had spent their lives tying the same 2 or 3 knots, leaned in. They watched my hands with an intensity I had only ever seen them give to a difficult lift. They were silent, their faces etched with concentration. They weren't just learning a new technique. They were unlearning a lifetime of certainty. One by one they took turns, their thick, calloused fingers fumbling at first, then slowly finding the rhythm. Mike, the silent veteran, was the first to get it right. He pulled it taut, looked at his own handiwork, and then looked at me. He just nodded, a slow, deep nod of understanding that was worth more than 1,000 words of praise. After they had all practiced, after the deck was filled with men quietly tightening and inspecting their new knots, Sal walked over to me. He stood there for a moment, watching the tide roll in. He didn't say he was sorry. Men like Sal don't use those words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brand new rigging knife, its wooden handle smooth and dark. He pressed it into my hand. "My old man was a Navy man too," he said, his voice quiet. "Stubborn as a mule, thought he knew everything." He looked from the knife to my eyes. "Don't ever let another man cut your line, you hear me?" It was his absolution, his apology, his promise. From that day on, no one ever called me Scout again. I was Rob. I was the man who held the line. Respect isn't loud. It's not a round of applause or a slap on the back. It's in the small things. It's the way they now pause and listen when I point out a potential snag. It's the fresh pot of coffee waiting for me when I get in. It's the simple, easy silence of working alongside men who trust you, who know that what you bring to the job isn't in the size of your arms, but in the quiet, careful workings of your mind. I came here to work with my hands, but I learned that the sea, this place of brutal, honest force, doesn't just test your muscles. It tests your nerve, your knowledge, your character. It teaches you that the man who makes the most noise isn't the one who leads. The leader is the one who runs toward the danger when everyone else is running away. I still taste the rust and brine every day, but it's the taste of my life now. A life I built, not with spreadsheets, but with rope and steel and a moment of impossible pressure. I earned my place here, but sometimes, when I'm watching the ships slide out into the bay at dusk, a question still drifts into my mind. They see me now. They nod. They listen. But do they respect me for the man I am, for the quiet knowledge I carry? Or do they only respect the memory of what I did when their world was about to shatter? It makes you wonder if they truly remember me for what I proved, or if they just respect me now because they needed me. Read this ending, and if you've ever felt that way, just comment with the one word that describes you when they all doubted you.